Good evening, everyone. It is Monday, July 22nd, 2024. It's just after 5:40 p.m., and this is a board work session to discuss long-range facilities planning. Why don't we begin with introductions for the benefit of the record? And Chris Swigert, board member, why don't we go around this way, and then we'll catch our virtual attendees at the end.
I can actually highlight our virtual attendees. So I'm Jen Wimmer, superintendent. And then joining us virtually is Tim Harder, the director of facilities technology, as well as Brian Brewer, you see there on screen from Baird. They're our financial partner.
All right, I'm Jackie Michaels, I'm the project manager with EUA.
Bob Morris, also with EUA.
I am Erica Freeman with Findor, almost said Erica Findor. One back, thanks.
Ryan Tribe with Findor.
Amy Sarno, School District Financial.
John Donaldson, board member.
Melanie Aircraft, board member.
Chris Jenkins, board member.
Kelly Lang, board member.
I should mention that two of our board members, because of pre-arranged travel, have excused absences and won't be participating tonight. We have a quorum to proceed, however. So, Superintendent Wimmer, why don't we proceed?
So the first slide is just reminding the board what you did at your last work session, where we kind of built this slide as we went, what we were asked to do. So that pursuit of the November referendum, the rebuild of Jackson, made some decisions around that. And again, just reminding even prior to that, that our response from our community survey was at 61% for that 100 million mark, that 54% at 125 million. So the board challenged the team to come back, and we've done an interim report on, you know, what does the next 10 look like, so that we can maybe make some prioritization and some decisions there. So that's what's bringing us here tonight. You had an interim, gave some preliminary feedback on that, and then what are we going to kind of hold that to for that dollar amount? What do we want to focus on? So just a reminder to all, this was our first model of the process is that inverted triangle, and we're kind of right at the end of that, finalizing what is exactly going into that phase one plan, what will we proceed with as a referenda question for our community, and then just reminder of some key dates. That next board meeting, that's when you're looking at the language and approving that for the referendum to be on a fall ballot, and then November 5th, that date where the community would then let us know how they feel about that. So again, your priorities across the top there. Then Bob created this graphic, so I'll let him describe kind of what's the next phases for us.
Yeah, so when we look at that upside down triangle, we're near the end, right? We're nearly there with the defined scope. But from our perspective as architects, what we're really doing is just deciding what the project will be. The actual design of the project doesn't really begin until after a potential successful referendum. And so as we look going into the future, our goal before a project can really be bid out is to have full construction documents so everything can be bid competitively, which takes a lot of time and involves a lot of decisions and meeting with a lot of different people. And so the actual design of the project, which is yet to even begin, really is divided into those three phases: schematic design, design development, and construction documents. And that usually takes, for a new school, around 12 months to work through that entire process and get before construction can begin.
I think it's kind of your end of the table, pass down that way.
So when we look at budgeting assumptions, going back to this previous slide of the design, similar way for budgeting, we're in the conceptual phase. So as we work through the different phases of construction, we'll come back to the table with revised budgets for the district to view. And then along that, we'll just review the scope and make sure that we're all aligned with what's on those documents. So a couple other things, just what's included in our number right now, just on a high level. We're including that 4.5% inflation rate right now. It's comprehensive of all the project costs of what it takes to get from that shovel in the ground to the very end, ribbon cutting. So you can see all the different items that we have in our numbers, and we're assuming a start of 2026. That hasn't really started since we started presenting these budgets. And again, just to reinforce that these budgets aren't final, they're not out to bid. Once we get those final documents from the EUA, we will be sending those out to bid and get refined numbers for that.
All right, one of the things you're going to see tonight as we work through the scope are some preliminary conceptual plan diagrams. And really the way to think of those as you see those coming up tonight is test bits to verify the scope. Because remember, that's where we're at right now, is we're trying to set what that final dollar value should be. So when you see those plans, they're not finally designed plans, nothing is complete, everything is subject to change as we go through that design process. As we look at the plans, you're gonna see colors, orange, dark blue, and light blue. The orange corresponds to anything that's new construction, so for Jackson, you'll see the entire building is orange. And then heavy renovation is spaces where we know we are going to reconfigure the space, where walls and things are going to move, which involves a heavier level of expected work. And then you won't see a lot of it, but I think at the high school, you'll see some light blue. Where there's light blue, we're not really anticipating major movement of walls, but we know there will be some reconfiguration of electrical or windows or doors or things like that within the space and make it work well for its new function. So that's essentially what those plans or what those colors will be as we go through the scope at each site. So we will start with Jackson Elementary, the new K through 5th grade building. And just as a reminder, the existing Jackson is just slightly off the screen to the top side of the screen. This is that new land where the former fire department, I believe, was, to the south of the existing site. So district already owns that land. We're looking at kindergarten through 5th grade, 3 classrooms per grade, 82,350 square feet, which gives you a functional capacity of 429 students, and then looking at an opening of fall 2027. Our friends at Findorf have put together an initial estimate based on this criteria of $48 million for that new school. You know, anything to add to that?
I just ask a real general question. So one of the items that we've looked at over the years is the importance of having a safe place for parents to drop off and pick up children. Can you just general, I realize this is not final, but what would this include that would be different that Jackson maybe doesn't see today, or maybe our other schools see or don't see today?
Yeah, really good question, and thanks for pointing that out. So I think one of the struggles with your existing Jackson school is there is no off-street pickup and drop-off area. So traditionally, when we're looking at a school, we're trying to find space for an adequate number of cars to queue off the street so that we can have safe pickup and drop-off of students. And then we're also looking for separated bus and parent traffic flow to avoid that sort of commingling or the students moving between moving cars or buses or things like that. So in this plan, as we look at this site, again, this is preliminary test fit only. The actual design, no doubt, will look different than what you see right now on this site. But the key elements that we're looking at in the purple line is a potential route that is sort of intentionally increased in length to get as much queuing, pickup and drop off as we can. The yellow is a separate bus pickup and drop off, in this case potentially utilizing some of the staff area as part of the bus pickup and drop off because we can kind of coordinate that. Bus drivers can be trained to operate and do what you want them to. Parents, we've learned over time, cannot be trained, or at least it's much more difficult to train parents. And then generally, as you're looking at this site, it's really more there to kind of show you the components we would expect on the site and the relative sizes. So we know this site is sort of crowned in the middle and then drops off to the north and to the south. We will have to have stormwater control for both the north and the south side of the site. The footprint that you see is based on that 82,350 square feet. As shown there, that would be for a 2-story building, although it doesn't necessarily have to be a 2-story building. And then we're looking at relative sizes of parking, playground, and soft play areas.
I have a question. So what's the difference between that budget and what we were initially given for a price for Jackson? Because we were told 70 to 80 million. And that's how we defined our budgets of what we wanted to go for referendum. And were we just given a bunch of fluff so we had extra dollars? Is that what it seems? Because that's what it seems like to me right now.
We have K-8 that we were looking at too, so that dramatically
But,
increased.
right, but that was, I guess that wasn't fully explained, because obviously I never wanted to go over 100 million, everybody else went to 110, whatever.
Mhm.
And, I mean, was this even a thought that the price went from 75 to 80 million down to 48? So we lost 25 million plus in that initial estimate on that facility?
Yeah, I think they're looking for I was kind of going back to the last slide myself where we laid in the K-5 through K-8. And that was an important board decision to make to shrink that
Yep.
so that we could get more of that. So that's a decision the board made, I think, on the
But that was,
prior meeting.
that was told we could do that, to save a little money and not really add, or we would get more with the money, obviously. But I don't know if that was ever explained that went down to $48 million, because that's quite a big jump. I mean, that's potentially $25 million, that's
At the
less than
June
what we were told.
22nd board
Thank you, I couldn't
workshop.
think of that.
Yeah, slide 15 on the June 22nd board workshop, the replace Jackson as a K-5 school was a budget range of 47.9 million to 54.2 million. So that was the range that we were using. I think some of the decisions the board made, specifically around sustainability, was allowing us to pull some of that dollars out of that range because we understood more direction from you as a board. And then based on that, Findorf and EUA had further conversations. So now we're coming within the range that we've been providing the entire time for the K-5. I think you're thinking of the K-8 cost.
Sure.
But the K-5 was 47.9 million to 54.2 million.
And the square footage has dropped a little bit since that
That's right,
range
it was
as well. We were at
86,000.
86, now we're at 82,350. And that's a function of really just sharpening our pencils and reviewing what exactly are all the spaces that need to be within this new facility.
Yeah, we had to do a direct match with every single staff member, every single space, and then map that in to the square footage. So that was detailed, that wasn't there prior.
So as we went from high level, this is what we would expect a building of this size to be, to a little more
What's our building
specific
gonna look
view,
like?
what are
Yeah.
the staff you have, and, yeah, exactly. Right, any other questions on Jackson before we move forward? Okay, Green Tree Elementary School, so remember in this scenario that we were exploring, Decorah and Fair Park come offline. So what we are left with is two existing elementaries and then Silverbrook becoming an elementary school. So Green Tree is our first elementary school, now pre-K through fifth grade, pre-K because Rolf's is coming offline, and so some of that program from Rolf's moves into Green Tree. So as you're looking at the floor plan at the bottom there, the intent of the renovation or remodel at Green Tree, which is fairly limited in scope, is first to create a secure entrance sequence for the building. So that's like you have at Silverbrook now, that ability to bring the office to the front so that visitors go through that new secure front office area. The idea is to make that as safe as we can, but also as welcoming and inviting as we can, both at the same time. So there's a relocation of the office to the outside, and then backfilling what used to be the office with resource areas in the inside. And then since we brought part of that Rolf's program over, we do need to retrofit some of the existing rooms to create pre-K rooms that didn't exist before. So there's some development of bathrooms within those rooms and other facilities that pre-K students need within their classrooms. And then the other sort of blue areas that you see around the plan are remodeling of existing non-ADA compliant restrooms throughout the building to bring those up to current code. So this kind of focuses on the renovation scope. What you don't see necessarily on these plans are some of the capital maintenance replacement items, which are outlined more here, and I'll let Ryan talk you through this one.
So we have a handful of categories you'll see throughout the next couple of slides for each different school. We have it broken up into the 6 categories. So we have the renovate and reconfigure options, safety and security, and then the 4 different categories that we went through for the capital maintenance exercises. So we have the scope between the renovation scope and the capital maintenance scope, which we worked with Tim on. So here's just a list of each of those projects and the dollar value associated with each of those categories. And then on the right-hand side, we have the potential added scope. So from the direction from last meeting, we were tasked with those additional items that you guys can pick and choose from. So those are listed on the right side there.
So the main move with the relocation of the office is shown in that top line item, the renovate and reconfigure category, and then each of those other capital maintenance scopes appear within those other categories, which you see consistently as we move through.
And the biggest thing, and it's not just to renovate their offices, that's what is the secure entry sequence for that campus, which is missing currently.
We touched on this a bit last time, so let's talk just a little bit about that potential added scope. I think one of the concepts that we had talked about is something that administration believes is worthy, is necessary, but also something we can save a bit of money by doing it now. And I think we talked about this, that I use a silly example of, hey, we're gonna have the ceiling torn open already and we have to replace something 3 years down the road. It's probably cheapest to replace it while the ceiling's already torn open. Can someone talk a little bit, I remember we talked a little bit about this, I think Tim might have talked about this before, that kind of falls into that category. This is to refresh the logic on that, just for a refresher here and maybe for those watching online. Tim, do you mind?
Yep, no problem. So, Chris, you are right. It is, we're opening ceilings and we're doing work. We're also looking at the concept that there's other wiring projects, there's some electrical things that are being done there, and also typically across other buildings at the same time. We're also looking at antiquated and aging systems that are part of our safety and security piece. So that was another priority reason as to why that was an additional scope for the board to consider. So there is some cost of doing it together and also making sure, hey, we're opening ceilings and we're doing some plumbing work. All of those mechanical type pieces are open, but also that piece of we want working PA systems, and those systems can actually nowadays be tied into our security systems and our alerting systems to do automated annunciation out to classrooms and or to staff and so forth in the building at the same time. And so by doing it together, we come together with a safe and secure package, also with moving our offices for that secure entry sequence. Many of those safety controls start with that piece at the beginning of the office.
Thank you.
Any other questions on this scope? before
Yeah,
we go on?
if I could ask about Rolf's. So is the intention to take the one facility and the classes, faculty, and all that that currently fits in that facility and split them up amongst each of the elementary schools? And
Not
it's-
each,
Okay,
to the two sites.
two of them. Okay.
Yep, so the Green Tree site and the McLane site, driven by the teams and the programs, as well as the geography where the kids are coming from.
Okay. I just want to make sure we're
Yep, great
restraining
questions.
ourselves.
Nope, good questions.
All right, with that, let's move on to McLane. So similar diagrams here. McLane is a 3-story building, so the 3 floor plans here. This is the other 2 rooms that relate to the wall scope, are those 2 pre-K rooms mentioned on the first line. So we are converting McLane into a 3-section school for grades K through 4th, renovating classrooms. We're renovating former classroom space to create that secure entry sequence, very similar to what we were doing at Green Tree, backfilling the existing office with resource space, similar to Green Tree. There are a couple toilet rooms being added for those 2 pre-K rooms, and then included in the capital maintenance bucket, there's the remodeling of some existing restrooms on the lower level to bring them up to ADA compliance.
Again, here's just the breakout for each of the projects, similar to Green Tree. We have the renovate and create the security and entrance. We got the fire alarm systems that we're replacing in the large scope for the exterior windows, and repairing the foundation that we've been kind of going back and forth with Tim and trying to figure out what we can do to fix that. And for those of you who are trying to add this in your head, we do have a summary slide, so as we go through this, we'll get it all added up at the end of the project.
Questions on this scope? Okay. Silverbrook. So as you know, Silverbrook is an intermediate school now, so this would be a conversion from a 5-6 school to a kindergarten through 5th grade school. So as we're looking at the plan, you kind of see 2 areas of renovation. At the top part of the plan there, that's ticking, I think it is 7 existing classrooms and converting them to 6 kindergarten classrooms. So kindergarten classrooms tend to be a little larger. Since kindergarten wasn't part of this original plan of this building, we don't have those kindergarten classrooms with the special kindergarten amenities like the ensuite toilet rooms in those rooms now. So we're taking kind of one pod, if you will, and making that a kindergarten pod, reconfiguring all of those classrooms. And then we're doing some renovation for a self-contained special education program as well. So those are what the 2 main remodel areas are.
Again, here's just the price, so we got the 4.09 million. You can see that we don't have anything on the other scopes, but this just goes to show you when you guys invest in the schools, it does pay off for the scope of work that we're looking at in the 10 to 15 year period.
So the one other capital maintenance item was the loading dock there, which was original, not addressed in the last project, so addressing that. But other than that, no other capital maintenance.
What's the deal with the loading dock?
So going through doing site walkthroughs, that concrete is failing, and after conversations with Tim, it's not serviceable for deliveries anymore. It's not safe.
Because that's like one of the newest schools.
Right,
But
but that's why we put in
yeah.
their original,
Yeah.
because it wasn't addressed in the first round.
2012.
Yeah, because I get that a lot though, to John's point. People perceive that when we touched Badger and Silverbrook in '09 and '12, that we touched kind of everything comprehensively, and we didn't. There were some things that were not addressed at the time, so it is an original piece to that school.
Okay, Badger Middle School up next. So again, kind of a conversion here. The important thing to note right off the top is as we change the grade level structure at Badger, no renovation required to change that grade level structure. And in some senses, we're going back to what Badger was sort of originally designed to do, which is part of why that we don't have to renovate to sort of accommodate that. What you see on the screen is the second floor plan. We didn't show all 3 plans here, but really what we've done is just gone through a test fit exercise to see can we get the number of classrooms we need to make that function the way it works at 14 classrooms per grade to accommodate capacity as projected. So that ends up being about 4.5 classrooms per house. So there's a little awkwardness there. Awkwardness is the wrong word, but a little bit of a transition period there as the population continues to shrink. Initially, it has to be able to serve a little bit more than 4 sections per grade, but it's projected to sort of drop down to 4 sections eventually. Okay, and then, Ryan, any comments here?
No more of the same. We're prioritizing the fire alarm systems in a lot of these schools. That's an important piece to keep your buildings operational. And again, going back to the Silverbrook example where there's some items that you guys did not address in previous, but we've identified as working with Tim that are priorities to get those resolved. So
I do have a question on the replace fire alarm, because Badger is, so much of it is brand new. Does it need to be redone that often? Like, is this 1.45 expected that regularly?
I guess I would have to lean on Tim on the last time what the scope was previously.
So Kelly, in that case, you have new sensors in classrooms and so forth. This is the panel system and all the behind the scenes stuff. So they use the original from that. And then you would have to meet new code, which now requires some enunciation by verbiage outside just the screech that we're used to for fire code at that point. That portion was not done as part of the remodel, and that code has changed since then. So this would bring it up to that point in time. But we would reuse as much of the current sensors and equipment that we have. It's a lot of the behind the wall stuff that we don't have up to code.
But to that point, you don't have to get up to code unless you touch it. And do we have to touch it?
I think, I don't know if you've got this one on your fingertips, but some of them are past their expected life, if anyone knows the
So is this-
expected life. And when they break, I don't have
And
parts to fix them.
that's fine, I did have a
Yeah.
conversation with Tim, and if this is part of that, then I
Yeah.
understand that part, but let's not say we have
John,
to
it's
bring it
just-
up to code, because if we're not touching it, we're grandfathered in until we touch it and have to update at that point, so I just don't wanna sell it that way.
Maybe the age and if we're to the failing point or not, to John's point around so people understand what the true scope is.
Because this is part of the system that if it fails, that's a automatic, we have to
Right,
update
yeah.
the whole thing, we can't get parts anymore for it, is what I
Correct.
understand.
Correct.
So,
And there's some logic too for consistency in systems and approach, I think, as you look across your district too, because you are doing it at other schools. Even if there was a way you could sort of nurse that system along, I think there's some logic in that sort of consistency. Other questions here? All right, East-West High School. Here you're going to see the scope gets a little bigger, and so I'll try and walk you kind of through a series of dominoes that this scope is based on. So this starts with the concept of bringing the Educational Service Center, this building, this function into the high school, because there is space within the high school to be able to accommodate that. And so that's what we're looking at on the sort of upper right-hand side of the screen. You see the Education Service Center label. Essentially, we went through a programming exercise for all the staff that are located out of this building. And so the size equivalent is what you're seeing on the plan here for Educational Service Center. Also in this building is the alternative education program. And so you're seeing a separate sort of block of space dedicated to the alternative ed program. And then the warehouse for the ESC, which is in that light blue on the bottom. So those three functions, the Educational Service Center, the alt ed, and the warehouse, are really the equivalent square footages of what is needed to bring the programs that are here at this building over to that facility. Now, as we bring those services to the high school, we want them to really function and work intuitively and solve existing problems that are at your high school at the same time. So we're trying to kind of leverage and work that into a way that actually makes the high school a better place when we're done, instead of a more convoluted place, if you will. So what we're looking at doing is addressing security at the high school with a new secure entrance similar to what we were seeing at the elementary schools. So at the top, you see main entry, and then you'll see ESC entry, and then you'll see alt ed entry, those three orange pieces. So what we're doing is creating a dedicated and sort of identifiable entrance into each of those three functions, because each of those three functions really does have a different sort of destination, and you want people to be able to sort of understand where they're going. And part of your security feature is sort of that intuitive, people knowing where to go so they're not going to the wrong places. Go ahead, John.
so those are essentially the towers, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And those have never been used as entries.
No.
So is this really gonna be like, something that's actually gonna be used?
Yep.
It
so
seems like, because obviously the parking structures lots are on both ends,
you still
and
have
everyone comes through
entry.
the sides, and no one ever goes through that main area.
Yeah, so let's talk about, let's highlight a couple things John's talking about. I'm just gonna kind of play here.
Yes.
So, in the absence of a secure entry, so to your point, when you're open for school, kids are arriving, all that, you have multiple points of entry and supervision in those pieces. So we're talking about once your school day starts, after your school day ends, and again, our buildings are locked throughout the day, so all of that time, right now, our visitors are coming in off that field house. I have someone with a cart,
So this is.
and then they have free reign of my entire building until they meander down to an office on their own, unsupervised, which is, again, hundreds and hundreds of feet for those who are just not familiar. So again, you're trying to have that secure entry where they're coming in. So this is a parent coming to pick up, a student with a late arrival, those kinds of things. I'm here for a meeting. That's the kind of traffic. You're coming into that main entry instead of them coming in and being buzzed in or just monitored at one point.
So I'm assuming all the visitor parking is gonna be right there then, next to them.
You'll have a couple points, and I think Bob can talk about it, but where we would isolate ourselves, we would have our own point of entry and our visitors and monitor that. We wouldn't be forcing that traffic into the high school. and expanding that.
But the parking for main entries would be relatively adjacent to those entries.
Yeah, correct, and you have sidewalks, so that whole horseshoe up top is all, like right now, staff use it because they can get in. So all of those would convert to visitors, and then you see this side lot there, and
Mhm.
sidewalks in, and a little side lot there. So it's not just the couple spaces and that little,
So there will no longer probably be somebody sitting by the field house doors.
right? They'll be right there with a line of sight to let you in right there, and then you stay into that office until you are sent to where you're approved to go to.
It is really valid, though, it doesn't mean the other entrances go
Yeah,
away.
yep,
It's just
mhm.
that they're not used during school day, right?
We just need to be a student who gets here late and is parked way down there in the parking lot, far around the building.
They do that now.
I know.
And we will not be having 2,000 students file through the.
They are
budget.
not, that, again, that's your one-off late kind of,
So just to continue with the sort of domino effects then, that education service center block of space that we were looking at and the office areas that we were looking at to relocate, to kind of create those sequences, those are not empty spaces now. There are things, there are functions that occur within those spaces. So as we look at the other areas in blue, they're the domino effects of relocating the spaces that go there. So,
and just to that point, one of the exercises that, you know, the team had us go through is really analyzing the future space. This building's gone through multiple configurations, and over time, you know, Lenny or Andy would know, but the reduction of kind of central office staff over time, we're not carrying over the same footprint of operations that we have in the past either. So we really analyzed what the spaces needed, listed out who's who, what their functions are, that kind of thing, to make sure. So that was a reduction in space as well.
good point. And as we're looking at those spaces and sort of recreating the spaces that get relocated, we're trying to make them function and again address some of the shortcomings that your high school has now that were identified in the facilities report as well. So the first domino you're seeing there is the math department. So within the Educational Service Center, we have some math and some science classrooms now. Science is actually moving up to the second floor, which you'll see in a minute, and then math is consolidating on the other side in this preliminary test pit. To make room for the warehouse from the ESC, we have to remodel some of the tech ed spaces that is then taking over to sort of consolidate those spaces and make them work a little more efficiently, which is what the tech ed remodel area is about. And then finally, over by the office, there's kind of on the other side of the hall, 3 classrooms that are sort of left over there that we're flip-flopping back to the other side so that they won't be sort of isolated and stuck all by themselves. So we're really trying to make this functionally be a really cohesive and coherent plan when we're done.
Speaking of the tech ed stuff, is the ceramics included in some of that?
That would be art.
Okay.
So, yep, your tech ed are gonna be your CT classes, graphic design, video production.
I just was made aware
engineering.
that the ceramic area was very small.
There are definitely some shortcomings within the art department that are not addressed in this plan, as there are a number of other shortcomings at your high school that this plan is not able to completely address, because we're trying to limit the scope of what we're doing to keep the overall project scope down. But yeah, that's a very valid point.
Because if you go back to code, apparently there's furnaces and things that maybe might
No.
not have proper spacing, or.
Nope, they're just revamped. Tim, it was your replacement of the kiln, so it's your kilns that are associated with firing pottery and those kinds of things. So they just redid that. I think when Dr. Reese was here, they did the purchase of the new kiln and then put all that in. So that was done. You know, I think that efficient use of the buildings, because then you could, right now, the art department is sitting kind of in the side of tech ed. You have other courses that don't need specialization. Like I could adapt another classroom for 2D, 3D, some things that don't have your pottery wheels, your kilns, things of that nature. So, you know, hopefully as we get access to more space, as, you know, enrollment settles, we can, again, a lot of the high school classrooms we feel are small.
Yeah. As we move up to the second floor, we're really taking advantage of what is mostly sort of underutilized and somewhat empty space now in what was a former library space. And that's where we're looking at relocating science into one area there. The nice thing is, because that space is pretty underutilized now, it gives us some sort of swing space and some sequencing, the ability to kind of do that space first and then allow that to kind of be used as the domino effect to allow the other space to occur. Just roughly speaking, we're imagining the Jackson work would probably happen first, and then this work would happen. So that's pushing completion of this off potentially to fall of 2028 at this point before the high school will be occupied.
I don't want to open up a can of worms, but I'm thinking of, as the ESC moves into majority of half the east, the math gets consolidated in one area, science gets consolidated in one area. Aren't we, in a sense, going down the line and not having two separate high schools?
Oh, they're currently configured that way into departments.
Yeah.
Yeah, so even within the department stuff, then they might have those kind of teams, but they function as departments right now.
So it's not like back in my day where if you went to east, all of your classes were here and west is here, it could go right and figure it out.
Yeah, yes and no, there's some certain areas that are that way, so then they predominantly schedule. So we'll schedule first out of the pass, where if you're an east student, you're predominantly scheduled, and then the efficiency of having it all under one roof is, if I run into a class that I can't run, if I commingle the kids, can I run it? Can I still have that opportunity? Yes, you can. You're being efficient with that class instead of a low number, then we run it. That's when you get commingling of kids, if it means that we can still run something. Or it might be a really specialty class where it's just an elective or something, and then it's just one is offered and kids can take it, and they might be in a commingled class as well.
So at what point is it continue to be silly that we have two separate schools that are in one building that have to be consolidated together?
Well, I'm not gonna editorialize on that. What I did ask, and I think it was before you took office, I asked the board at the time, do you wanna call the question now as part of it? Because what that is doing, having the two schools under one roof, and I've worked in districts where we have different programs with identities, what it's doing is it's accelerating the depreciation of mostly athletics. So my turf can't last as long when I'm pushing two full high school teams, two full lacrosse teams. You know, I'm doubling down on everything on one space. So I don't have two of those things. I'm efficient that way, but it does accelerate the depreciation. The board at the time felt that they would do that as a secondary piece because we're dealing with the high school as a whole and not choosing east or west, but they didn't want to kind of commingle the political part of that question for our community with the facilities needs. The needs exist whether they're under, you know, it's all under that one umbrella. But you're right, the board had talked about that needs to be a next conversation and part of the work.
But just exploring Chris's question just a bit more, is there anything that we've proposed so far that if we said, oh my gosh, if one day we said there's only gonna be one high school, oh, we would have configured this differently, or is it,
No.
oh, we'd have done this anyway?
You're set up for that. You know, what they value, even if they're in different teams, you know, I might have, you know, East Social Studies or the West Math Department, they're being able to have team space, that department where they're going into their classrooms that are smaller, then there's a like planning room opportunity where they can get together as their teams, whether it's the whole department or my East team and West team. It's the value of that space. And then it also helps protect our classrooms in that they don't have enough room to be storing a lot of their extra stuff. They need that kind of hub of a planning area as well. So they can still have their separate identity and still have those. And again, not harming if that should change in the future. It's all completely flexible.
Yeah, I would say from a planner perspective, it doesn't matter to us whether this stays East and West High School forever or whether someday it changes. It doesn't.
They said it was originally designed to add a north and south to it. And then have four when they undid the pile, like, okay.
So just to bring that all in for the total budget for the renovation scope, we're at that 25.2 number, and then below we just have listed the various capital maintenance items, just touching on a couple of them, just replacing the field house bleachers, and then replacing interior doors and hardware, that's just, again, part of the safety and security, adding the additional layers of just making sure that the building is set up for what we're doing, for larger scope. So in total, we're at that 33.4 for the base scope, and then on the right-hand side, we got the additional potential scope that we can look for direction we will be proceeding with those.
With regard to the windows that are in the potential added scope, 75% number, I'm just curious, is it because 25% of them are fantastic already, or is it 25% are horrific? Why 75%? Just out of
So
curiosity.
when we were doing the original capital maintenance walkthrough, going through kind of approach of replacing a certain amount of things so you have a cycle. This one, we just chose that, working with 10, that we just decided to use that number to get as much as we can within our budget that we have. And obviously with our base scope, we'll have some lumped in there as well.
And Chris, you're not gonna, for example, the Silver Lining Arts Center, the
They
pet
don't
center
need
that
that.
has been added on,
Sure.
those spaces have new windows, so we would not look to replace those through this. So it's not 100% replacement. Very similar to, you see Green Tree, it's the original windows, it's the original doors. The new portion that was touched as part of the last referendum added on, we wouldn't replace those. Same concept at the high school.
Any thoughts, comments on high school scope while we're looking here?
Big discussion at the last meeting about the parking lots. And I know there was discussion around the logic, and I was just curious, since we have our additional professionals here, just talk a little bit about that. I think there's a difference between, you know what, they cosmetically could look like they could be replacing versus, no, we have to replace them because they're sinking, or they're broken, or they're gonna be busted up during construction. Can you talk a little bit about the logic around parking lots?
I think that gives us a chance. I know this is just replacing one for one, but when it comes to, when we were talking earlier about the discussion of the main entrance, that could potentially give you an avenue to rework that, to make sure that works with the new plan. But in terms of the scope of work, again, this is a big one where you kind of do it in a cycle like your roofs, where you don't want to have them get deteriorated too much, that they're in poor shape. So this one, we just determined that this is one of those where this is the cycle where it's up.
And it becomes a really big ticket item where it's hard to just do that out of regular operational budget.
I'll share a little bit of financial information as we look back to when we began with the community conversations. Not just the project scope and all the detailed information that we've just shared, bringing that culmination together, what type of question we'd be looking at, what type of dollar amount specifically. So even dating back to the July or June meeting, $100 million and looking at about a 95-cent per $1,000 assessed value scope. 105 million, 110 million. So those are the culminations of all the projects together, how it would be phrased on the question. We additionally have a board policy that talks about disclosing the interest cost. At this point in time, it's an estimated amount. And so you'll see some of the bullets on the bottom that Brian Brewer and his team brought together. The current mill rate for the year that just ended was $5.20. We had no levy for any debt repayment because it's all been essentially satisfied, already been levied. So this proposal is in addition to the current $5.20. That fluctuates from year to year, but the important part is the dollar amounts that we're sharing between the principal, the interest, those are the repayments based on certain criteria. So using a 20-year repayment at 4.75%, Brian shared last week that right now the debt issuances that they're looking at from the April approved referendums are closer to 4.25%. So we feel that we're conservative at this point in time, but we don't want to overpromise and underdeliver in that sense. So holding tight at this point in time with the principal and interest, and again, that's repayment of both principal and interest. Got that question at the last community conversation as well. So just wanted to share that, reiterate that. We've been bringing this information along. We have been levying for debt. We're done. And this would be a question brought forward for that in November.
So,
Questions on that?
sorry.
You have a question, I'm not sure if it's a Brian question or an Andy question, but you drew breath.
No, when we get to, I think I'll just make note of the 100 million at 95 cents and the 105 at the dollar, because those are your two when we start adding up things. So we'll focus on that when we get to the meat, which is what projects do you want to improve?
Right.
Yeah, the quick question that I had was, I think we talked about this at a prior meeting. So as we were talking about, some of these construction projects are kind of stretched over time. Can we just walk through the mechanics around, let's say the board approves a referendum question and the community approves a referendum. So, I don't know if it's a Brian question or not, let's say it's 100 million, I'll just pick that. Do we borrow the 100 million or do we do that in stages? I'm just thinking from an interest cost perspective. Do we borrow all of it up front or do we borrow it in stages? And if that's the case, it takes 2 or 3 years, let's say, to borrow. What happens if interest rates fluctuate?
Yeah.
I think this is maybe
Brian,
a Brian
I'll start
question.
out and supplement Brian. So, an approved referendum gives authorization for a specific time period. Brian, 5 years to complete the.
Yes.
To initiate the borrowing,
Mhm.
begin those projects. So we have time to do that, so it's really dependent on the project scopes and the timeline that's developed. And then once those dollars are borrowed, and it's possible that we may break it into 2 different borrowings. You need to be mindful of the interest costs that will be incurred. There's also spending requirements, so you have to spend the dollars within 3 years. There's even a couple of different checkpoints, if you will, throughout the period. We even have to worry about track and monitor interest rates. So it's possible that it could be, based on the project scope, when you look at something like Jackson Elementary at 48 million, and the other projects that are pushed out beyond that, it could potentially be 2 borrowings.
So you bring up a good point. We've talked, kind of your next presentation would be really working with the board on what is the strategy then. Once we have kind of what's the question, what's the scope of that, then what are our opportunities, as Andy's laying out, with a financial strategy around your borrowing, all your different phasing. So we talked about that with Brian as being kind of a next, its own topic to dig in and talk about then. I think it was you who used the milestones or checkpoints. There's all sorts of along the way with just the financial aspects of the project to go through too.
Because again, this is a 20-year, and that's where we've been for the discussions. Our prior issues were less than that, 16, 18-year debt issues. And so that is the next discussion that we would have to have, is what would that look like? Not just the borrowing, the dollar amount, but then that repayment, as real numbers start to materialize rather than these estimates.
So just no more financial conversation coming, just orienting you to the context of what that means. So that next one is really the meat of our discussion. So to that point, getting that base plan shown on the left there, once we got, I think Bob said, sharpen the pencils, it made it more personalized and real, trimming that out to a $98.72 million. And then all along the way, we talked to you about some potential added scope. Those are the things you challenged us. We kind of did a check-in on July 8th and then brought them back here. Where do you want to land on the ask? And some of the pieces, I know June was not able to be here, but we talked about those things, and she said, she'd like to pull, the things associated with the safety, which are some of those PA systems, all of those, and pulling that out. So if you were to kind of make a unique, if you took all of it, you're at just a little over $106 million if you chose to step over and do every single piece of that puzzle, right? Because again, just for our public, it's not a wish list, this is a need list over time. So we're making that and prioritizing some of those things. So leading with your safety and security pieces on that, you would trip into an additional $4.4 million out of that $7 million would be moving all those safety, security, PA things over, and you'd be looking at just 103. So you could take that whole list at 106. You could take the 98 list and say, nope, we don't want to add anything. One of the concerns that Dr. Temez had shared prior at a work session, and that was, we've inherited kind of what happens when you have to kick things down the road. And then I think it's Ryan who else reminds us that construction costs never go down. They only go up. So what are we doing to our community if we defer this in some way? Are we costing them more dollars in the future? So he was a proponent of let's look at these priorities together, which is 106. June was looking at and understanding, how about if we pulled over the safety pieces out of it? And that would be an extra 4.4 off the base, which puts you at about 103 mark. Or looking at funding, the only other way you can split it is, okay, let's say I want to take a couple of those pieces off the high school. I want to take the safety and I need to take care of the foundation things because they're going to cost me money later. Then you're really looking at 104.5. So it's just giving you some context. Your discussion is, how do you want to kind of look at potentially adding scope? What do we want to do? And that's really for the board to discuss, so we can, so I'll leave it to you to facilitate that part.
Sure. All right, so I guess thoughts on approach. Maybe we can start with, is there anything on the list that someone would say, boy, I just don't think we should do it, whether it's on the left side or on the right side? Maybe we can talk about that. John?
I would just say, so once we get this project started, our capital maintenance budget that we currently have doesn't really matter. I mean, we're not gonna be spending that, our own money, because now it's coming out of the referendum money, correct?
No, we still would maintain a capital, because remember, our needs are this big, and this is one slice of the pie. We still would have a capital maintenance budget.
Yeah, that was one of the points that I made back in June, is currently it's at 1.8 million and change, growing by 4%. We've been honoring that would continue, and that long-range facilities plan still exists. There's things that still need to be
And what are we
addressed.
gonna be doing with that money during the project though?
There are other maintenance projects that are on the list.
We can't use that to pay for the new clock things or whatever we need?
Our
That's
needs,
not-
our needs
John,
exceed
to
that.
jump in, is, things like that, things that we didn't purposely put in there, like our roofing schedule. We average right around $1 million every year to do roofs currently. We don't wanna do 15, 10, $5 million of roofs a year and have to deal with that in the future.
Right.
So we are continuing to keep things that are going. We're to the point where we have some smaller maintenance and capital needs for HVAC at, a Badger, as that building becomes 15 years old after the remodel. So there will still be pieces that are not taken care of through what you see on the board up here, that's what we would use that 1.8 million for. So it wouldn't go away, and it certainly has a need for some of those ongoing pieces. I know we haven't shown the slide tonight, but if everyone remembers the red, orange, and yellow, green, kind of those buckets of things, we still have a lot in the red and the yellow and the orange to address over the next 3 years. That's where we would, in essence, rework our capital maintenance plan a little bit to do it in partnership with these projects, if that's what the board so choose to do.
One of the things that we've talked about this being, remember, we've kind of got all that, I said it early on, it was like having a credit card payment where I'm making them, a big balance and making the minimum payment. You still allocate those dollars to that, because I want to lift us out of that cycle. And I don't want to then create a new cycle where yep, I'm going to spend all this money this one time, and then I'm going to let it all deteriorate, and then I'm going to spend it again at this. We're trying to reset, to Tim's point, that cycle where we continue to invest at the amounts needed in the capital improvements so that they're maintained. Just like you saw those investments in Badger, Silver, Brook, and then the district could then maintain and keep up. So I think that's an important part of the work, and then we come right behind it and reset that whole long-term capital maintenance program around it.
If I may, when I look at that chart that Tim was referencing with the potential closure of the building, so this would just be your school that would remain open through 2028, which is when that high school work would be completed. That's $100 million in capital maintenance that was identified. So in a 4-year period, you're still looking at $100 million. Granted, some of it is going to be accomplished with the referendum, not $100 million worth of the capital maintenance.
Following up on one of John's points, if we believe we're moving forward with this, let's say we had in our capital maintenance budget something to, I make this up, replace the roof on this place? The answer is, we probably redeploy that, correct?
Correct.
That part is true.
Yeah, that, we took that into account. Remember, we talk often about, 50 million, a little over $50 million in avoided costs. It's not that I get all of a sudden a new bucket of $50 million, but I get to avoid
Right.
spending the money on square footage that I don't need to carry forward.
Thoughts, questions? I think one way and I appreciate the view that we had when we went through kind of school by school, to look at the areas. I realize there's a lot of stuff underneath, but there didn't seem to be anything in there that I had serious disagreement with as relates to the places that we were, pieces that we were touching. I do agree the things around, obviously, the safety and security, very important, and also very supportive of, and I guess this would be on the left-hand side, the items that allow us to consolidate and bring unneeded facilities offline, because that certainly saves a lot of cost, ongoing. When we look at it on the right-hand side, I can't really say, the parking lots are gonna need to be replaced at some point. I guess, that's the one item that maybe I would say I need to understand that perhaps a little bit more. But the safety, security, repairing foundations, windows, energy efficiency, these don't really look like they're luxuries. As it relates to the idea of being able to, this is not going to catch us all the way up, but at least bring us kind of way from the backside as it relates to deferred maintenance. I think these are worthy projects. Other thoughts?
I agree, and I think if we're asking for this amount of money, to not do these things when we're already asking for this seems like a missed opportunity at this point. I think that we need to do what we have lined out.
Melanie, what do you think?
Yeah, I would, I feel like in the whole scheme of things here, I mean, it seems like a lot of money, right? But like the percentage that we're adding on is so, I mean, it's minimal. Like, I just try to like break it down into a smaller amount that would be, easier to understand for like a household budget, right? Like if you're spending $98 on something, or you're spending $107 on something, it's like a minimal amount more.
And that was the piece of, remember those numbers, because at the 100, it was the 95 cents, and I think it was 105 was the dollar.
Right.
And then, like I said, if you can advance, go back, if you add up all of these, you're at 106.25. So the implication on what that would mean for, as you said, translate it to our community and their households,
Right.
to see what that impact would be.
Yeah, that's going back to how many square feet we have as a district. Just the sizing, looking at the footprint of our high school. But we're a large organization, we're a large business.
Mhm.
And we're low spending, we're at the floor, statewide average of the floor, and a low taxation district.
We have a nice chart that kind of showed, I think it was in the beginning, where in the process as it relates, this is not a final design. We talked a little bit just again about the process, to say, fine, if the board approves, insert some number. Ultimately, there's going to be, the design will have more detail about what's in or out, and there will be more decision points along the way, right? And so,
Yeah, behind kind of your overall process document, they put together with some circles, behind that is a massive spreadsheet of then every decision along the way. You're gonna have to be making not just the design decisions, and those take time. When you get into that point, you're dealing with your staff who are impacted, your families who are using this space. You're having further conversations. So it's also not the only point that our community would be involved in those. And then you're having additional conversations around the strategy, around the financial approach, the strategy. So there will be a whole nother kind of slate of, yep, and now here's the decisions in front of us, around these different areas. So it takes a fair amount of time, to your point.
my point is, there's obviously a lot of detail in and underneath this that we don't have visibility to, because we're not at that point in the process. Am I oversimplifying it by saying, we're making a decision to say, look, it looks like about 100, 110, 108, whatever it is the right number. And if we go to referendum and ask for that, that's the most we have to work with. There's flexibility around, we want to spend a little bit more on windows and a little bit less on a fire alarm or something of that sort. But really, you're talking about budget. So we're not, it isn't, we agree to this, tell us how it turns out. There's
Right.
still some things where we have opportunities to say, I don't know, I mean, that doesn't really make sense. we can't borrow more than this, but there are more decisions to be made along the way. I
You're
just wanted to make sure I
setting, yep,
understand
you're
this.
setting some key parameters. It might be helpful to advance all the way actually to the sample referendum language. Keep going. Okay, so when you get to the point, so what you're doing tonight is you're setting those parameters, and you're going to say it doesn't exceed X amount, and then we're giving some generalization. Is it on new construction? Is it on renovation? Is it on these pieces? You're setting those parameters, and you'll get, this will get converted into actual legal language, but your biggest thing is, to your point, you're not going to exceed X. Let's say, like, we always want to come in great on bids and, you know, and continue to save throughout the term of the project. I think it was Andy who said, you know, or be conservative so that we're always, you know, over-delivering on something. But again, if bids came in high and something, like, I can't magically exceed that. You're setting the parameters of what kind of the big ideas in the project are for us and for the community on that language. That helps. So just kind of walking away, there's still a fair amount of behind the scenes, design, budgets, all of that kind of stuff to work out. So just setting some big rocks.
I think in every project that we do, as we actually get into the nuts and bolts of the design, which we haven't done that yet, that's the next phase, post-referendum, there are always opportunities that come up during that process as we start to work with staff and other people about how are you going to teach, how are we going to work in the space. There will be opportunities to say, oh, we could have thought about this differently and made this building work more efficiently this way, and that gives us some money back where we could maybe spend a little bit more. But at the same time, we will find misses as well where, oh, when we get into that fire alarm system at this building, once we open this up, we also really need to take care of this at the same time, which we don't know about yet because we haven't started to get into that design. So always, the numbers will fluctuate a little bit. These are those high-level estimates like Ryan was talking about at the beginning. We're trying to develop enough to let you decide on a dollar value, but we know that the design isn't done.
And then we have to, this is what creates and defines, and we can only work within those parameters. So, you know, I can't then all of a sudden say, you know, swimming pool at every school, or, you know, something like that. This is setting, what schools, what are you doing, what's getting touched? And again, to your point, some little nuances here and there, but no surprises for our community.
No, I'm just going to kind of reground ourselves because, right, we look at these and purposefully they're at a high level,
Yeah.
right? It feels like, boy, you know, we really crave a lot of detail. But the reality is, this is normal for the process.
Right.
And we're setting outer parameters, but we have more decision points along the way once we start to get into more specifics, more design work is done, we understand, oh, we can spend a little more over here, maybe we trim back over here. There still are points of flexibility, but the idea is we can't just go out to our public and say, oh, we just picked a number out of the air. There's logic behind the number,
Correct.
and this is what we're trying to identify. I'm sorry, I think
Do you want to take us back to kind of that slide? That's, yeah, that summary slide for us, back a couple more. Yeah, right there. So to that point, what are the parameters so that we can then create the legal language so that we can approve a question, and then we can continue to refine the work ahead of us.
So I think the idea tonight is discussion, right? Because we're not taking action, but on August 12th, we will.
I need to go back to a lawyer after
Right.
tonight and say, this is the max. I
Exactly.
can't exceed, that means I need to take that offline, I need to take that one, yep, move that one over, so I can have them write all the legal language for the question. So I can't fill that in until the board kind of gives us direction on that. So what, if anything, from this right column, do you want to slide over?
Slide over to include.
And include into that. So again, our phase one, kind of that base plan that we talked about is coming in under 100 million. So are there any pieces off those supplementary projects? That was a challenge to us. Show us what the next kind of up to 10 looks like. So here's what we're saying are priorities. Kind of keeping safety, security, and efficiency of using those dollars in mind. Is there anything that we want to include there?
I know it's referred to Kelly, is there anything, you can understand how you'd like, either to
I
include
say
or
it
not to
all.
include?
I would just take that
Include it.
full right and put it
Mhm.
in the whole thing.
Chris, thoughts?
I would just say the baseline, at least moving Green Tree and McLean stuff over, because that gets you to that bare minimum of 100 million that we've already agreed to by consensus. And so really the debate is whether you want to have the high school stuff or not.
Mhm. Thoughts?
I guess for me, yeah, definitely the Green Tree and McLean, and, I mean, if you're doing those, bell clock PA systems, it would make sense to also include that at the high school level. And I guess in the whole, I feel okay with moving it all over, just because in the whole scheme of it, like, that is such a small amount that's left. And that's something that will probably be hard to find in the capital maintenance budget in the future, to be able to replace those items. It makes sense to me to move it over.
John, thoughts?
So essentially, we're a little over 5 million, close to 6 million more than the $100 million, right? About
All in.
106 million bucks.
106.25.
What is the extra $6 million cost us in interest over the time?
It's a penny a million per year,
Okay. So
per $1,000 of assessed
So-
value.
And for the taxpayers, I mean, I did the math, it'd be 375 for me at 100 million, it'd be 392 for the extra stuff. So for an extra 19 whatever dollars a year.
John does ask an interesting point, and I was thinking the same thing, because we could say, well, we theoretically watch administration throw sharp objects at me. But in theory, we could come back 5 years from now and say, well, let's do another referendum. What we're fighting, I suppose, is inflation on construction costs. So really, the key is if we're able to borrow at a decent low cost, I mean, the interest versus the inflation we pay at the different time. The difference between it, I think, is, again, if we have the ceiling torn open, not only are we fighting inflation, but it should be more expensive just in general. I mean, I look at those right-handed projects and say, you know, the first one under high school is safety, and I think that makes sense. Repairing foundations, certainly is important. The windows, I'm going to assume, you know, have energy efficiency pieces. I mean, the parking lots too, if the idea is, look, it's a big ticket item, and this is another thing we can pull forward to kind of get us out of the deferred maintenance hole. I mean, I think those all have logical sense as to how to include them. Because I have to, I mean, I agree with John, I was doing the math in my head, but I thought, well, between inflation and if it's cheaper to do it in conjunction with this, I think it saves money. So I'd slide them all over. But
I guess the only thing that I struggle with is, you know, I've been set at the $100 million. I'm still okay with that, which does slide Green Tree and McLean over there. But over that, if we have a budget to build a house, you know, you have a budget to build a house, you're looking at tiles and you're saying, oh, I really like this tile because that's what everyone else is getting, but it's twice as much as what you can afford, then you gotta pick the cheaper tile to stay in your budget. You know, I just wanna make sure that we're keeping that with the district and making sure that we're gonna stay in a budget, and if we have a lower budget, we're gonna really make sure that we want what we want, and we wanna put the right stuff in the schools without going over just because we have the extra money. That's what I'm struggling with, because if we go we get all this extra money for a budget, then we're just gonna, I don't want it to be pissed away.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
that's for one.
To your point around, you know, staying within the needs, and I think, you know, that juxtaposition of how much is it gonna cost our community right now versus how much that was one of Chad's things when he was talking about it, like, you know, if it's pennies right now in this, what's it gonna cost our taxpayers in the future if we don't do that in these conditions, to your point? And like you said, marry all these pieces of staying very conservative in our approach to the projects, in our approach of what we have to do, because we're still, like I said, solidly in the needs bucket. I'm not an area district where I'm going for a $260 million just new campus, you know, on something. That is not, you know, us. And like you said, it's the diligence all along the way. You also don't see, you know, that's why we keep forecasting. You know, it feels like you're gonna take action and it's a little ways out because of the diligence along the way in design and bids and all of that, having that longer runway in front of us you know, and potentially staging borrows and using financial strategies every step of the way. I think for us, that's a key theme I've always heard from this board is being, you know, responsible with, you know, our community's tax dollars on things. And I think kind of our timeline and all the approach sets us up to continue to do that, to John's point. Look for every nickel all along the way too.
Yeah, that's why we have those checkpoints of the schematic design and design and development. Those times we identify where we can save,
Yeah.
where we can reinvest those dollars to different projects.
I'll say, like, I tend to lean conservative with spending too, but like, to me, like a foundation or old windows, these are like luxury items, you know, and they're kind of important repairs that should be made, and the same thing with the parking lot, you don't want a crumbling
Yeah.
mess, and like, they are big parking lots.
I've
you
seen
know?
worse roads around the city than that parking lot. And if I gotta pay taxes on two things, I'd rather go to my road.
Those are a hot topic here.
And I know that you made a comment earlier, I think in a lot of districts that are working in, there's several that have some decaying asphalt around their spaces, and their insurance actually is asking them about those questions, because that is a safety problem, people can be injured, so. I also think about the 1.75 million is your entire budget for 1 year for capital maintenance, from a
Right.
cost benefit perspective, but I get it, it's, when you're being taxed by both your school district and your city, weigh those against each other, but sometimes it's more, it's not an aesthetic thing.
Other thoughts? So ultimately, the board will have to approve this.
So you
But
want to,
hearing, go ahead.
you want to clear tonight with what is the board collectively going to support? You want to come into August 12th with that legal language and this board standing united to present something to the community on that. So, you know, we've heard a lot of kind of, yep, we get that these aren't wants on this side either. That puts you at 106.25. And you've seen the taxpayer implications, potential future implications if we defer some of those things. You know, is there anyone opposed to that ask at this time?
And is the ask 106.25 or is the ask 110? I mean, are we
It's-
rounding on purpose, or are we saying the need is exact 106.25?
Yep.
There's no reason you can't say.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure.
Yes, you would ask for that exactly.
Okay, I don't want to shoot some, but.
Nope, good questions, good questions.
Well, and I like that too. I think that we're being very, you know, we're listening to the community by saying we're not going over that. This is what we feel that we need, and that's the number that will get us there.
I also appreciate you talked about just the hypothetical 110 number. What I'm not seeing is stuffing every little thing in there to get up to
Yeah, we
110.
didn't magically hit 110 because that's what you said.
These
We
are the projects
said-
that you picked, and
Yeah,
yeah, and I think that was the feedback that we had given around, you need to be able to give a logical, compelling reason for taxpayers as to why to include them, and I think between the safety and the foundation and windows makes sense. You know, again, parking lot bringing in deferred maintenance, but that seems logical, so. 106.25?
you gotta be able to say yes on August 12th to that, so. But I mean, really, like you said, it weighs on you heavily because it's a really big decision, and what are the implications of it now versus then versus those things. John? Only because you said, you know, you've always had kind of 100 in your mind this whole time, and what does that mean or not mean for you?
Yeah, I'll stay optimistic that we can shave pennies and dollars here and there and get down to 100 by the time we're done with this thing, but I'll go with the group and I'll stick to that.
Well, I think that's a good challenge to our friends here. that-
We do have an election year coming up. I mean,
Yeah.
things could shift, interest rates can come down, costs can come down and
Yeah.
stuff, who knows? We can always hope for the best.
And
But
as we're
this is
talking
planning
about,
for
as you
next year.
said, there's some room for some nickels along the way, you know, we've refinanced prior to that, you know, you're always gonna be leveraging those opportunities, so.
Yeah, that was something I was gonna ask too, if you can refinance.
Yep, you can. We did that before.
And that's a good point. First of all, I mean, to John's point, we don't want to willy-nilly borrow more money just because we
Right.
can. But a tenth of a point on the interest rate, that, you know, that is a massive
Yeah.
difference. We have to pay great attention to that, and I understand
Brian?
Brian.
Yeah, Brian had to jump on, so that-
And we certainly will, but
Correct.
we
The
really
4
have
point-
to.
The 4.25% that he's seeing right now from the April approved referendums versus the 4.75 over 20 years, I think, and don't quote me, I think it was the 100 million, that's $6 million in interest
There it is.
difference. So, yeah,
That's
It's
where we-
potential.
yeah.
I mean, we obviously need to do good value engineering or whatever the right word is, but borrowing, we really have to, I mean,
You gotta
small little
nail that.
pieces
Yep.
make big differences, so we've
Yep.
got to take a look at that, so that we can value engineer correctly, but also more than make up for it with good financial practices,
And
which
we
I
have a
assume we will do.
we have a strong history of that. So dating back to the 2 prior referendums that were approved, we did a great job financing those. Brian and his team did a great job with that. Even the refinancing that we had a couple summers ago, it worked. And they build those opportunities into it in case everything aligns, so you can leverage those for being smart with your dollars. And being able to say thank you again to the taxpayers. Because that's what we're able to do.
And it's still way less than the 150.
I did.
Thank you.
Anything else to present to us?
Nope, just a couple more slides. I don't know. So Erica's the one behind the live slides, always.
Live action.
I have live action, so that's what that looks like,
Oh, I see.
right? So she's dropping in as you go.
Got it.
Dropping in
On
as you
the
go, right. So landing at that 106.25 would be the ask for us. We talked about that critical meeting of August 12th. That's where, and I showed you just a little bit of a preview before, we'll start working with legal around dropping in that number and that some of those references to scope in there so that you can see what your language would look like that you'll be asked to take action on August 12th. And then that's well in advance of the deadline, statutory deadline, which is August 27th. And then, once we have all of that defined, then we pivot and we start working on communications, all of that information, understanding all of those pieces, and then some of those financial conversations. So it's a lot of work ahead, but that's capturing where we landed tonight. So certainly lots and lots of work, and again, then we would fill that in with the 106.25. We would start writing in those school names into that language based on our conversation tonight. Any questions from the board or?
Have a good discussion tonight, I appreciate it.
It's some of the hardest work you'll do as a board, so I appreciate it. It's a lot of diligence and it's a lot of time and kind of extra onto your regular board work and duties. So I think we landed in a really great spot. It's really meaningful and we'll go from there and continue to move it forward. If there's any questions as you think about things, don't hesitate to reach out to any of us, whether it's the financial side, the facility side, myself, around as we look, Erica, Kit, and I will take point kind of pivoting and thinking about communications and getting this together so people understand some of the details, like some of the questions you asked during work sessions help us to know, oh, we've got to explain that better to the public, we've got to get this out, that kind of thing. Don't be shy about reaching out, but we'll continue to, as we said, kind of move forward based on your direction tonight, which is the 106.25 to encompass the detail that we saw here.
Just following up on that, if there are interim questions on, I really wanted to know more detail about the PA systems or something.
Yeah,
of that sort. Call, because I'm guessing, as it relates to the agenda for the next meeting that we have, we don't reconvene with a work session like this.
Correct.
Just
You'll
want to make sure we have the
see-
right people for the right time.
Right,
So
yep.
ask the questions in advance.
Yeah,
is the best.
yep, and you don't have to, let's say it's something, that's gonna come a little bit later, those things, or here's a great time to talk about it all together, that kind of stuff. We'll get you those answers, talk about what questions were there, and if there's things we need to take as feedback for our communications. But at your next meeting, you're gonna really stay at this level around your legal language with the referendum question itself.
It's one of those formal resolutions that is probably fairly thick. There's a one pager, it has this, signature lines, but there's work that goes into that, but it's a formal resolution that action is taken on.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
All right, any objections to